Hello, my name is Katrina, and welcome to our Artist Talk with AJA Louden, Graffiti as Resistance, Seizing a Voice with Manitoba Craft Council, Take Home, BIPOC Arts House, and Black Film Collective Winnipeg. We are gathered here today in what we now know as Manitoba, the ancestral heritage of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Nishinuak, Dakoita Oye, Dilisuene, Nahituak, Inuit peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. These land occupy territory subjects to treaties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. Craft occupies a space that is the hand and the handmade at its center. It rejoices in sharing community knowledge and solving problems. It stems from, creates, and nurtures community. It allows us to build bridges through shared action, but also fosters courage, empathy, and connection. We acknowledge the deep harm caused by settlement, and we look forward to using craft in our efforts towards reconciliation and positive change. AJA Louden is a Jamaican-Canadian artist living and working in Amiskwi-Siwa-Ke-Can, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Through rigorous mark making, construction, and installations, Louden builds stories and worlds that are firmly rooted in both galleries and public spaces, infused by his experience of growing up Black in the prairies. His current work focuses on the cyclical nature of power, inspired by science fiction and historical paintings. Louden's recent use of textiles considers the role of craft in Black communities and the history of craft in rural Alberta in particular. Louden's work has been shown in public spaces and institutions across Alberta, including his 2024 solo exhibition, Prairie Star Deck at the Alberta Craft Discovery Gallery, Alberta Craft Council Edmonton, and the 2022 retrospective exhibition Black Every Day at the Art Gallery of Alberta that featured his large-scale site-specific installation Constellation. In 2022, he was awarded the Edmonton Artist Trust Fund, and he was selected by Faye Heavy Shield, Lieutenant Governor 2021 Distinguished Artist, by a unique award from Lieutenant Governor of Alberta's Arts Awards Foundation. Louden's work is in the collections of Alberta Foundation and for the Arts and the Misericordia Hospital community. I'm going to give it over to AJ, and anyone who just came in, please make yourselves known. Come on in and grab a seat.
Thanks so much, Katrina, for the intro. I'm here to chat with you today a little bit about graffiti, and I want to start by introducing a few projects from my own practice, just to talk about the way that I work, introduce a few pieces that mostly exist as public art, some graffiti pieces, and then I'll tell a few stories from the history of graffiti, and I'd like to open it up at the very end just for a bit of a Q&A. Anyone has any burning questions, feel free to just shout them out. Let's just keep it casual and open, and I find that a little bit more fun. Takes the pressure off me. Alright, so here are a few examples of my work. I work a lot with community, and so as a public artist, I'm often tasked with connecting with community to help tell that community story in a public place. Other pieces of my public art are just my own story that I'm telling. That really depends on the work. So here on the right side of the image there, you can see a project that I've been doing in Banff for several years now. That's a project with the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies, and we've been collaborating with artists from each of the First Nations who have traditional territories that overlap over the town of Banff. And we're working with each of these artists to tell stories of their communities in Banff. Banff is a major tourist attraction in Canada. A lot of people come to Banff and it's their first experience of this country. And what we've found, just doing research and spending some time at the Caving Basin site, which is where we're working, is that the stories that were being told centered the settler experience, and that there was a lot being missed about the longer history of that area. Specifically, the Caving Basin site was a sacred natural spring that got turned into a tourist attraction. So making sure that the stories of all of the communities who had traditional territory that overlapped there are part of the story of Banff and part of the actual tourist experience was a way for us to try and insert ourselves and make sure that the stories that were being told were everybody's stories, not just one group of folks. And so a lot of my work has that intent and purpose, is to make sure that we're telling a broader set of stories. I grew up in small town Alberta, and I didn't often see myself reflected in the art that I would see around me. It was often pictures of, just things that I didn't necessarily connect with. And so some of my efforts involve representation in public spaces. So this is a mural that I painted on one of the ETS stations, so that's like the train system up in Edmonton. And this mural tells the story of the way that Edmonton is woven together from a tapestry. It's like a tapestry pulled together from different cultures. And so each one of the spheres that you see represent one of the communities that we connected with for this particular mural. And then we've got a set of hands weaving all these stories together. One of the things that I found with representation in muralism growing up is that I'd often see, if I saw anyone with dark skin, they would be like racially ambiguous. And so that was something important for me to do here, is make sure that the race wasn't ambiguous. It might feel like a small thing, and I think sometimes as artists we're trying to make something that can appeal to everyone, and I've learned that maybe taking a step back from that and being specific about the communities that you're speaking to and for is actually a better approach, as long as we have a diversity of that. Then we can all tell really specific stories instead of just telling the most baseline stories. So that's something I've learned through these processes. So this is an image from the very first iteration of this body of work that you're seeing now. This isn't a piece that I show anymore. It's a mural that's on panels, so it's about 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall. You can see that it's bordered with some foliage. The name of this piece is Rule of the Moderates, and it's a snapshot from within this same universe. The work that you're sitting amongst right now is starting to describe a story that talks about a changing relationship to power with a group of people. There's a mother and a daughter that are centered in this story. And so this is one image from that story. One of the things that you'll see that I was starting to do on this particular image in terms of craft that you'll see reflected further in the work in the back, the calibrators, is that I was starting to work dimensionally. So I started primarily as a muralist. My background is in graffiti, so I learned how to use spray paint fairly effectively to paint quickly, large-scale images that have some volume and depth to them. And my studio right now in Edmonton is in a wood shop, and so I have access to some woodworking equipment and more importantly expertise. So I know people that can tell me how not to cut my fingers off. That's super helpful. And so one of the things that's maybe a little difficult to see in a flat image is there's a gear shape in the center of this installation, and that is actually dimensional. It pulls off the wall, and all of the border elements are dimensional too. So this was one of the early attempts for me in breaking out of the two-dimension and starting to take that flat image and protrude it into the space and interrogate the three-dimensional space a little bit more. This is another piece from that same show. I don't show this piece anymore either, yeah, again, the same idea of starting to play with dimension. Both of these pieces reference historical paintings, and referencing art history is something that is valuable for me too. You might see some art historical references, particularly in the figurative work, but finding a way to insert ourselves into the canon as people of color is something that I'm interested in, and I think by referencing art history, there's sort of a way to do that I believe in.
When were these pieces made?
What's that?
When were these pieces made?
Oh, good question. These pieces were made, I showed them in the first year of the pandemic. So they were made over 2020, and I showed them in the late winter of 2020. So now we'll move into some exterior public art. And so this is a mural that I painted in Lethbridge, and the name of the piece is Belonging. Again, one of the things that I'm really interested in is representation through public art. When I went down to Lethbridge, it reminded me a little bit of my experience growing up in small town Alberta, and that I had to look for people that looked like me. I had to go find them. And it was hard to find restaurants that had our food, and it just is what it is. It's a smaller town, it's fairly remote, right? But a lot of my work thinks about the future. And when I think about the future of this planet and the way that humans are so mobile, we're like seeds. We disperse and we land in new places and grow anew. I think about the future people that will be coming to Lethbridge, maybe myself, in a future life, and planting something for those folks is kind of the vision for this work. Some of the things that you see in this mural are a depiction of the landscape of Lethbridge. So they have the river there, and they have a bridge that's a really important part of the landscape. I've taken that bridge and kind of disconnected it from the further shore and then raised it up like a ramp into the sky. So there are a few other things in the painting itself that suggest this idea of transcendence or movement or this beyondness. So those are a few of the things I was thinking about. Another element that's difficult to see in this photo but exists in person, the four corners of the work each contain a symbol relating to time. And I think a lot, again, about the future and the past and this idea of cyclical time, which is common in many African cultures, this idea of non-linear time. And when we look at human behavior, we see these patterns all the time. When we look at the natural world, we see patterns and cycles. So I think about the cycles, just the cycles of life. And when you take a look at the calibrators, the sculptures in the back, there's maybe a feeling of that they've got some age or where that time has had some impact on parts of them more than others. So two more pieces of public art, all from this same series. Both of these exist in Edmonton. Well, this one exists in Edmonton. The one on the right no longer exists. It was painted over, but I painted something new there now. Again, these are pieces that are thinking about the future. I think a lot as a muralist about the physical location I'm painting in, not just the building, but the sort of socio-cultural context. So who is living in the neighborhood around the wall I'm painting on? What's the transit route? Are people from all over the city seeing that going by on a bus? Are people mostly seeing it from across the street? Are they mostly walking by it and they can only see it from 6 feet away? And so in this community in Edmonton, it's on 118th Ave, and it's a place where a lot of new immigrants come. It's a place where rent is cheaper. So when I first came to Edmonton, I lived on 107th Ave and then spent some time on 118th Ave too. So it's a place where a lot of people come and get their first taste of Edmonton, get their first impression of this place. And so, again, making sure that there's some representation for my community as well there is important for me. In particular, the work centers these figures on the prairies. And so that's something that you'll see a lot of reference to is prairie plants, prairie landscapes in particular, the winter, the deep prairie winter. And so I grew up here. My dad came here from Jamaica when he was young. I've been here my whole life, but I still get questions about where are you from? So I feel like I have a distinct sense of place. I feel attached to the prairies. This is the only place I've known. I go to the Caribbean and I have a sense of home there too, but this is for sure my home. And so just making it feel like home and letting other people know that this is our home too was part of the goal behind some of these public paintings. All right, so I'm a huge nerd, love sci-fi, love Star Trek. Geordie LaForge was my guy, you know, and so one of my claims to fame internally, one of the things I can tell myself, I pat myself on the back about regularly is I posted this on Twitter before Twitter turned into a cesspool, and LeVar Burton saw it on Twitter and gave me a shout out. He's like, oh, good painting, and so yeah, I could die happy, I'm good. LeVar got me, reading Rainbow got me, I'm good. So that was painted on a free wall in Edmonton, and so I'll talk a bit about graffiti, and I'll do a little bit of work to help define graffiti. I'll talk about street art as well, and I'll also talk about public art and show some other examples of just commissioned public works. I'm mostly thinking about works in the public space as tools for resistance, and I'll explain why in a little bit here. The piece on the right says break the chain, and this is a piece that I painted on White Ave, and White Ave in Edmonton is an area where we see a lot of people experiencing poverty. And not necessarily receiving much dignity from their fellow community members. And so this piece says break the chain, and then there's a small tag in the bottom left that says decriminalize poverty. One of the things that when I think about social mobility for people of color and for other disadvantaged people, poverty is one of those things that once you escape that, you have a chance. But there are many things that can kind of keep you in that cycle of poverty, and the fact that poverty is criminalized, that you can get arrested for things like panhandling or vagrancy, all these kind of things, these outdated mentalities, I think really cause damage to vulnerable populations. And so by trying to voice it through a mural and trying to paint it in a way that wasn't necessarily just scary or scolding or trying to lecture you, but invited you in graphically was the hope for this piece. This piece was painted alongside a series of other messages myself and another artist I know, Evan Brunt, painted together that were all talking about sort of similar issues, either community solidarity or things like decriminalizing poverty. So we were happy to be able to put that up temporarily on White Ave. All right, so we'll get a little bit more into the graffiti and that conversation now. So on the right, I told you I was a nerd, so that's Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock. And I was a big fan of him too. I think one thing that's interesting looking back is I painted both of the very logical, data-driven Star Trek characters. I don't know, there's something there. And then both of these, or all three of these sculptures are about dealing with emotions, and I needed to build a machine to do that. So I don't know, maybe this image on the left is something I painted after one of the first times I got arrested for doing graffiti. And so in Edmonton, again, we have this free wall, and it's a wall where anyone can go at any time and paint anything they want. And so it's this interesting space between graffiti and not graffiti. One of the things that's generally associated with graffiti is criminality or being unsanctioned. But this spot is sanctioned. But it has the feel of graffiti that you can go and paint anything there, and it will likely get painted over soon. So it's an interesting sort of middle ground space that I spent a lot of time painting at, and I'll show some more work from that space. But this is me sort of like testing that. You know, I got in trouble. The police. This wall was actually right next to the police station, so the police drive. Yeah, so like you know, I thought I was being cheeky and clever at the time, so you know that was the mindset I was in. But yeah, again, I didn't get any trouble for it because we're allowed to paint there, and so this is me just testing that freedom of speech and saying, well, okay, really, y'all sure I'm not gonna get in trouble? So yeah, it was a valuable lesson there. So far I've showed you art on static surfaces or on panels. Graffiti, and especially graffiti on the prairies, is often on the side of the train cars. So the prairies, historically in Canada, have been connected by long train lines. Winnipeg and Edmonton in particular, Saskatoon too, have a really strong graffiti on train scene. So there are a lot of people here that are good at painting graffiti and they paint on the trains. You probably see, that looks like there's more tags and throwies and things downtown than like real full pieces. But I know that I see some train cars come out of Winnipeg that are like highly skilled. So just know that you guys got the juice here. So one thing that you'll often see is like covering up the numbers. So I just did this digitally because the painting wasn't finished yet. But we'll often not cover the numbers when we're painting a piece on a train. It's just so the railcar workers can see the numbers, identify the cars, and then they don't paint over our graffiti. But when we're posting photos of a train car, we'll cover up the numbers on purpose so that you don't necessarily know where that train car was painted. So there's a lot of tracking and logistics and thinking that goes into which cars you paint and why. For example, like the refrigerated train cars, they're called reefers. But they're really big in box units, and they travel, in some cases, the furthest because they're taking things like frozen beef from here all the way down to the southern states, or bringing things up, you know, things that need to be refrigerated. So they move quickly, and they move long distances to carry these frozen goods. There are also auto racks which carry vehicles, and so those often carry a bunch of cars up from the States and into Canada, and they have nice flat sides on them. So if you know where to go find those auto racks, you can paint a car that will be seen across the continent, really. So that's something that's interesting about writing on moving walls as compared to just murals on walls. So thinking about legality. So again, I got arrested a lot when I was working frequently doing unsanctioned public artwork. I had to deal with the consequences of that, you know, paying lawyer fees and community service and all of that kind of stuff. One thing that happened to me that was interesting was, in Edmonton we have a graffiti squad within the police department, so they are the anti-graffiti unit. They go and try and hunt all the graffiti artists, and that's something that your tax dollars in Edmonton are going towards. So this was the head of the graffiti squad, and a few years after he had busted me a couple of times, he ended up taking this photo in front of a mural that I painted at the legal wall. So I guess we're both fans of Bruce Lee, and he took this photo. So I bumped into him at another event where I wasn't getting arrested, and he mentioned that he knew this was me, and then gave me permission to use this photo. I think he got a kick out of the fact that I would use it in a presentation. So I think there's something interesting to be said there, that people see value in this art form, they can appreciate the aesthetic results of it, but then there's this control of public or private property thing too, that they're contending with, right? So it becomes a complicated story, I think. On the right, that is a night shot from painting in a train yard. It's a little difficult to maybe see from a distance. You can get maybe a quick sense of what the experience is like. So if you see some graffiti and maybe they missed a spot, it was probably really dark, go easy on them, like it's not easy. So I wanted to, we'll just jump into the presentation now that I've shared a few examples of my work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the definition of the word graffiti, because it's a word that's been stretched and pulled at the edges quite a bit. So it's difficult to know what somebody means when you just hear the word graffiti. You kind of need a lot of other context to really figure out what they're saying. So one version of the word graffiti, and This is not, these are not exhaustive definitions. One version of the word graffiti is basically about an aesthetic, a look. It's stylized letters, they're often bright and colorful. They maybe look like they're popping off the wall. You might have seen some examples in my work already, that break the chain piece. Maybe that looked like graffiti to you. Now that could have been on a t-shirt, and that might have looked like a graffiti t-shirt. It's more about the aesthetic of the graphic than the physical context of where it is, right? So it's a style thing. This is, to me, where craft comes into it. To achieve this, I told you how dark it was. I told you it was difficult to paint at night. You got to know where the auto racks and the reefers are to make sure you get a train card that's going to go somewhere, right? There's a lot of thinking that goes into it before you even paint something. Then controlling a spray can is its own craft. It's not like painting with a brush. It's less forgiving, but it's a lot quicker. And people who are experts with the spray can and who have spent a lot of time dedicated to the craft of letter writing and constructing and drawing letters and making them look more interesting in a specific way, that fits into this top left category to me, this subculture of graffiti. Often graffiti artists call themselves writers, so graffiti writers, not necessarily graffiti artists. That's some terminology that's normal. Also, we can think of the category of just unsanctioned public art in general. And so if you just walk around downtown and somebody was having a bad day and they just wrote something on the wall, or a good day and they wrote Harry loves Sally on the wall, whatever, with a little Sharpie that they had in their pocket, that graffiti writers would call that like civilian graffiti. And so it doesn't really have anything to do with this long tradition, kind of since the 60s and 70s, of breaking the letter forms, painting them spray paint, painting on the sides of trains specifically, all of that stuff. It's divorced from that. It's just a natural human instinct to write on the wall and have your word recorded. There's also this top right category, just a way to claim a voice. And I think many of these categories overlap at times, right? So you can be doing something that's this specific cultural aesthetic, and you're doing it to claim a voice because you didn't have art class in school. Because in the 60s and 70s, in New York and in Philadelphia, art classes got cut, and it caused this big boom in spray paint and graffiti all across the cities because kids didn't have an outlet. And people who need to make art will make art. It's not a want, it's a need. So in the bottom right corner, this is actually some ancient Roman graffiti, basically like bathroom graffiti. And it's just like a casual, predictable human response to shared public spaces. So it might not have the same urgency of expression as political expression would. It's just like, I'm in the bathroom, I have a pen in my pocket, I'm bored. I don't know, I know other people come in here, maybe I have a funny joke to tell or something. So it's a little bit of a different flavor. But these are some of the types and ways and reasons that people do. So thinking about graffiti and street art as well, they have an impact on our shared sense of space. And that impact isn't the same for everyone. Some people read a really beautiful tag as a threat. You know, it might feel like a threat to the natural order that you see around you. Maybe things are really clean and pristine around you and all the ads are the same style and all the windows are unbroken and everything is just a certain way, and then there's a tag there. And it might feel like a wrench in the machine or something, right? Some people read it like that. Other people read it as, like sometimes when I go to a new city, if it's too clean, I'm a little worried. It looks a little, like where are the people? Like am I, you know, I feel like it's a robot city. I love to travel, and you can tell so much about a city by the graffiti, by the writing on the walls, right? And if there isn't any, that silence speaks volumes too. So one of the functions of graffiti and street art as well is they compete with advertising, architecture, and signage. The prize is your attention, especially with words, written words, used as graffiti. When you're walking around downtown, the things they're asking you to read them are either trying to sell you something or tell you where to go. When we have public art, especially written things like graffiti, you can read a word that's almost nonsensical and it pulls you out of that state. In a sense, for me, it gives me a reminder of my agency. You know, I'm not just being blindly led around, but why does it say pickle there? Like, why? And it's spelled wrong? You know, like I'm shaken out of my whatever zone I was in, right? So I really appreciate that. Often the color palette or the idea that graffiti is meant to stand out, so people make choices to make that work pop off the wall intentionally. It wants to be seen, it's not trying to be quiet or subtle. So that's a part of it too. Also a low barrier to entry to create. So if I have a message that I find is vital and is important and I'm not financially well off, all I need is a can of spray paint. And I think there's something very empowering about that. I think that's also why some people can read it as a threat. You know, it is a threat to this natural order. We tend to ascribe to this hierarchy in society where, frankly, people with money get to do more things. And so by being able to claim a voice and not having money just be the main thing, I think that's a democratizing effect on public space. It's also a low barrier entry to observe. So it's art for free in public. I think a lot about who gets to enjoy art and at what level they get to enjoy art, when they get to enjoy art. If you don't have a lot of leisure time, you might not be able to, you might not feel that you're able to make the time to go into a gallery. But if you were just on a bus and you can see something on the wall, it's not trying to sell you something, not trying to tell you where to go, you have some contact, some experience with art in your day-to-day, and I think that can be incredibly powerful and valuable. I know when I am in my lowest states, when I feel the most vulnerable, art is one of the things that picks me up. And so to be able to make sure that everyone has more equitable access to that, I think is really valuable. So that's one of the reasons that low barrier to entry, both for creating and to observe graffiti as public art is an important characteristic of it. So some of the things that I will tell stories about, these are some of the stories that I'll tell about the ways that graffiti is used. So it can be used to inform or opine. Now, I'm using graffiti as a term fairly loosely here, partially about style and partially about not asking for permission in public spaces. In this case, I'm counting legal walls, partially because I feel like there are these middle grounds where it's not about permission, but for me, I can get more of an articulate idea across if I don't have to rush. So it's this balance. So I'm a big advocate for legal walls, especially on the prairies, because we have so much big, great infrastructure that could just use some regular revitalizing. So yeah, big fan of those. So informing and opining is one way. Art can also become an escape, both as someone painting art and as an audience member. There can be acts of collective reflection, and I have some specific examples there. And in general, it can be used to challenge control of public visual space. So this is a mural I painted up in Edmonton. This is several years ago now. If you're interested in politics at all, Jason Kenney was the leader of our provincial governments, the United Conservative Party, I forget what they're called, the United Clown Posse, that's what we call them. So the UCP government. I disagree a lot with their policies and behavior, and their new leader is probably worse. I painted a mural or two. But I wanted to paint something that tried to be clear and concise about some of my complaints in a way that would be really easy to read at a glance. And I think one of the things I'm seeing from many of the conservative movements that I tend to disagree with, both here and in the States, is this game plan of flooding the zone, it's called. So they'll put out a lot of policy at once, a lot of policy we all or many of us might disagree with, and you don't, there's just so much coming at once, you don't know what to call out, what to go to war for, what to battle, right? And so then a bunch of it passes and you're just left trying to pick up the pieces, And so that's an approach that's taken politically. So by being able to provide some clarity through an art piece that just calls out 3 specific problems and tries to be descriptive, I'm hoping to, this is like basically a message for the middle. There's a bunch of people that already agree with me, this is not for them, they don't need to see this. There are people who are like, it seems like there's a bunch going on, it's hard to follow, I'm really busy, I have a full-time job, I can't just be looking at politics all the time, which kind of can be a privilege too, right? And so just trying to speak to that middle who's maybe willing to be convinced or is curious about what's happening. So this is another piece I painted. This is a portrait of Greta Thunberg, and so she's a climate activist who's done lots of work globally advocating for more sustainable behavior and towards the environment. So she came to Edmonton for a rally, and the rally was quite popular, a lot of people attended, and so one way I wanted to respond to this moment was to paint a portrait of Greta on the free wall while the rally was going on. And this was my way of recording that moment in history. I find sometimes with political rallies, they can really be great for building a lot of energy and momentum, but if there isn't a clear course of action after the rally, sometimes all of that energy is sort of spent at the rally. You find a bunch of people that agree with you, and you feel motivated, and then you all go away, and some of that energy just might dissipate. And so trying to paint something that would stick around for a while or could live on the internet or just be some record of this was one of the goals here. So painted this portrait of Greta, and then about a day later, somebody came to the legal wall, and it's important to remember with the legal wall, anyone can paint anywhere. So you were totally allowed to go paint over somebody else's work. There's a bit of a rule of thumb that you generally wouldn't paint over somebody's work if you're going to do something less, with less effort than they did, but it's just a rule of thumb, right? So after I painted the piece, somebody wrote over top of Greg's portrait, "This is oil country." And then somebody after that came and wrote on top some French slurs, some misogynist slurs, basically. And so I find this moment really interesting because to me this is sort of the point of that legal wall, is a place for these public discussions to happen. It's not just about a place for me to have an idea and get my opinion out, it's really a place for all of us to have this public conversation. And I think it functioned as intended in this way. Now in terms of the way or the sort of like nature of the response or the counterpoint, I think it maybe could have been articulated at all, or you know, I think the misogynist slurs are a pretty unfortunate choice there, but I think it also does maybe point to the lack of ground on which to make an argument from. But again, this is something that would happen in the comment section online, happening instead on a physical place that's tied to a geographical location that people can walk by. So there's something about skipping the algorithm here that I think is pretty interesting. The fact that we can just need to share geological space, we don't have to have the same social media feed, we don't have to follow the same people or anything like that. I think that's really valuable, especially moving forward and thinking about the future. The comments were pretty funny, I just kind of put a few, but the comment section seemed as much a part of the work as what was painted on the wall. And so thinking about public art in the age of the internet, I think about that comment section or what people are thinking or saying about it. It's tangential to the work or floats around it, but it's not entirely unattached. So again, informing and opining. So in Edmonton, right near the beginning of the pandemic, there were some mixed messages, well, it seemed like this countrywide, there were some mixed messages as scientists and medical health professionals were figuring out the best course of action for the population, right? So which types of masks to wear, all of these different things, people were still figuring out. So I painted this. I have a background in biology and in science, so I felt comfortable like reading the studies that were coming out and having some sense of what had some legitimacy and what was not very well thought out. And so I was a proponent of masks that, still. And so I wanted to paint a piece featuring this character that I have, Tiny P. This is a pineapple character I paint a lot in my work. He's in one of the tapestries over there as well. And I wanted to paint him wearing a mask in a place where I've painted him regularly already. And this is a way of me both informing and opining. So the ways in which healthcare professionals were getting this information out to the world they're doing the best they could with sort of conventional methods, right? So we would see it in the newspaper. People would put stuff out on social media. If you were following their accounts, you might see it. There were ads on TV, things like that. But if you were maybe unhoused, living on the street, maybe you're the last person to get that news. Or maybe you're super busy and English isn't your first language or something like that. So having these visuals and trying to have some other elements that help connect this public health story to public art, to the graffiti that we see around us, was one of the intents here. So art can also be used as an escape, and so this is just a public arts piece, but I include this because I used all of the skills and tools I learned from graffiti to make this artwork. This piece is also about representation, and so this is in Edmonton on 107th Ave. This is one of the other avenues that I mentioned was one of the first places I moved when I moved up to Edmonton. This is an image of a young boy. His name is Kai. He's the son of a friend of mine. He's on his bicycle and he's wearing a full kente cloth garment. So kente cloth is a garment common in West Africa, Ghana specifically. You see them all over now. And so he's wearing this this garment that for him is a symbol of home. And behind him he's dragging these giant balloons, and these balloons are kind of overlapping. And so growing up in a rural community, like I couldn't walk to my friend's house, so it's a bike ride away. And so I spent a lot of time on my bike, biking up the hill, biking back home, and you know, those 20, 30-minute trips ended up being, you know, when you take the same route again and again and again, you almost blank out and your mind just wanders. And so this became a place for me to just explore the inside of my head when I was just on these bike rides back and forth. And so that's the idea here, that all these balloons represent this young man's imagination, and all of these layers are these parts of his mind that are overlapping and intersecting and interacting. You'll see one balloon at the bottom there that seems like it's being dragged along the ground. It's not as buoyant as the others. And this to me represents something that I felt necessary to acknowledge for people with big imaginations. You know, sometimes when you have a strong imagination, you can really project far into the future. You can imagine this wild world, you can imagine all of these amazing things happen. But on the converse too, you can also imagine the worst case scenarios, and maybe you tend to I forget how to say that word. Catastrophize, thank you, that's what I did, that's perfect, that's what I'm going for. So everything becomes a catastrophe, right? Every potential thing that could go wrong, you just imagine that to the nth degree. And so that's the idea behind this balloon that's dragging on the ground. There's an elephant in that balloon, and he's swimming in a little bit of water, and he's got a banner that he's holding above the water. It says, "This too shall pass." And so thinking about time and the relationship to time, and these things that we feel in our bodies with intensity, that this too shall pass is something my dad used to say to me when I was having a hard time when I was a kid. And so again, just thinking about time and the relationship to getting through some of these things. You notice this piece is quite densely layered, and my intent is that for people in this community, every time you walk by the piece, you can find something new. And so this is why this particular piece feels like an escape to me. It's not something you see once and you're like, no, I've already seen that, I get it. I'm asking you to find something new every time. So I'm asking you to have that same experience of wandering in your imagination, seeing what your eye catches every time you come by the piece. There are lots of people that go by on the bus too, so they're going to get more of a snapshot viewing of it. So I tried to give you something that from far away still had a bit of a story that I tried to put in at least. There are also a lot of references to language in this piece, so there are 4 different languages in the piece. And so another one of those things I learned from graffiti is like pulling in words and languages that have nothing to do with advertising, directional signage, or that kind of thing. So there's Cyrillic alphabets, there's some kanji in there too. All right, so another example of art is Escape. So this is not my work, this is the work of Saber MSK AWR, who's a graffiti artist from LA. Still a practicing artist, has moved into doing a bunch of work in galleries and things like that too, but still paints a lot of graffiti. This is a piece that he painted behind the LA County Jail after he was arrested and spent some time behind bars for doing graffiti. So his sort of response to that was to go into the drainage ditch behind the jail and paint this massive piece that you can see from Google Earth. So this was, to me, part of the escape is that the prisoners from inside the prison whose cells actually look out on this, some of them can actually see the work, which I find fascinating. There's this relationship of him sending something back in, right? Also the sense of scale there. If you've ever worked on one of those projects that is your everything for a period of time, that is an escape, that is a catharsis, right? It takes all your attention and it takes, for me, when I'm really deeply engaged with the work, I don't have time to be depressed or deal with any other stuff. All my attention is on the work. So I think that's a way in which this is an escape as well, just the scale of the work. Some art can also be used for community building. Now there are many ways that art can build community, but public art and graffiti done with spray paint in particular, one of the ways that we'll commonly paint is in a jam setup. So it's almost like a band jamming. We'll have a bunch of people painting on the same wall at once. And everyone's exploring their own lettering, but there'll often be some things that are decided to do in common. So maybe a color palette will be shared or some background elements. So in the example you can see here at the bottom, several of the artists have used characters from the X-Men comic books within their piece. And so that's one way of tying them through. This building has a really interesting history. None of the art exists on it anymore. This building was called 5 Points NYC. And it's an interesting piece of just hip-hop and graffiti history. If you look it up, 5 Points NYC, you'll just find lots of articles about it. Basically, the developer made an agreement with all of these artists to allow them to come and paint all over the building. And he just didn't want to be bothered and they would just run it. And so an artist named Mears1, you can see some of his artwork. He paints these light bulbs that are running up the middle of the building. An artist named Mears1 took responsibility for basically all the logistics and programming and getting people to come out and paint the building. This is a building that's been painted over many times over. So there are layers and layers of paint there. This is just one instance of it. And one of the things I love about graffiti walls is they constantly change, right? It's this rotating gallery. So all of these pieces have been painted, and then the developer, the owner of the building, decided that he wanted to sell it. He made the choice to do so and didn't inform the artist at all. He just started painting over it. And they took him to court for it. And in my mind, surprisingly, they actually won. And so he was actually sued by the artist for millions of dollars for violation of their intellectual property. I think their moral rights were technically what would be violated, because generally when you paint something, if you're the author of that piece, you retain moral rights for the work, and this exists for murals too. I was a bit surprised that they won, but they did, and again, it was a multi-million-dollar settlement against the building owner for the artists. So this to me was, that act, both the painting of the building and the lawsuit, was this sort of community building act within the graffiti community. I'm not sure what it will do to the future of landlords lending out buildings like this, but I think it's something really interesting to think about. Like, in some sense, there was a decision made that the cultural worth of the paintings on the outside of the building was so high that that it was worth making that decision, right? That it was worth this significant financial punishment. So graffiti in public places can also be used for acts of collective reflection. So this is an image of the Berlin Wall. This is one of the most famous sites for graffiti in the world, I think. And I'm always interested in the things that were painted on that wall. It's always a variety. There's a little bit of, you know, Harry Loves Sally and just kind of regular civilian graffiti. There's lots of political graffiti too. There's this American flag over there. There's the phrase "Unleashed in the East." If you love somebody, set them free. There's a Star of David down here. There's some important dates there too. So I think a lot about this layering effect and what this says, this voice of a community in a specific place at a specific time, this snapshot of what's running through people's minds. So this is another piece of collective reflection. This is during the Vancouver hockey riots. And so when Vancouver lost in the finals, the city lost it. And, you know, people were flipping cars over. Many of you might remember this. Things were burning, going on fire. The whole city was, it was a bit of a riot. And so one of the things that happened organically is that on construction hoarding, people would start to draw and write messages to the city. Basically, many of them were apologies to the city. Many of them were like admonishments, like, we're better than this. I can't believe this is happening right now. But it was this really interesting moment where the city all spoke together about the same thing on these walls. It arose organically, and then some smart official at the city decided to make it a more permanent or official thing, and so they actually installed some temporary walls where you could go and write for a few more weeks, and they wouldn't just get taken down like the construction hoarding. So when I think about an experience like this, I think about catharsis and what it feels like when you're seeing and experiencing all of this chaos around you, and, you know, some destruction and feeling uncomfortable about it, but just be able to write a message, to say something and feel like maybe that voice will be heard, is a really important and empowering thing. Edmonton just lost. We didn't make any walls like this yet, but I'll see when I get home what happened. So another story. Kilroy was here. Does anyone recognize this image in the room? A couple people? Okay. I do a lot of work with youth, and very few of them now recognize this image, but a couple of them will say, oh, I think my grandpa drew that one time, or something like that. It's pretty interesting. Some of you might know the long history of this image, others maybe not so much, but it's a pretty interesting one. I want to make sure we have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end, so I'll try and go through it a little bit quickly here. So this is the Kilroy was here image. You can see, I have two images here because there's a few variations on them, but the theme is pretty similar. And the story behind it is basically that there's a troop transport inspector who lived in the US during the World War, just as troops were being sent from America over to the European theater. And so the troop transports are these big ships that are just basically personnel carriers, and all the troops get on these ships. They're very like austere, you know, they don't have nice furniture, or there's no art gallery on this military boat that's going over to Europe, right? So this inspector would write, Kilroy was here, and he would draw this funny little picture. Now he had to write his name Kilroy, basically signing off on the inspection, but he had a little fun with it and made it a little more interesting, right? So what happened is this is the one little humanist looking drawing in these ships. All of these troops, these soldiers, many of them young men, many of them maybe haven't left their hometown before, you know, like this is one of their first experiences of leaving a country, and they're about to go maybe die. And so you can imagine some of the things, or maybe you can imagine some of the things that will be running through their head on this long journey overseas. Then they arrive in Europe, and they're in the European theater, they're about to go fight this war. they're landing maybe in places like Normandy or wherever they're landing, and maybe the signs on the walls aren't in English. And maybe they don't speak that language, and all of a sudden everything seems foreign, there's no symbols of home. So people actually started taking this image and writing it all on the walls of the towns that they would pass through as they advanced into the European theater. And so this image became echoed from what was written on the boat across the walls of Western Europe. And so troops would see it, and then they maybe get injured, and the next round of troops did get sent home. The next round of troops would go, and they'd see this Kilroy here thing, the thing they just saw on a boat. And so it became this early version of a meme. And so soldiers ended up coming back to North America and still drawing and writing this image. Just became kind of a little brainworm thing that once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it, and it just started to appear everywhere. So there are people with this as a tattoo. I painted it in some of my murals before. It's become this symbol of a shared experience, but then it's expanded beyond that. So I think it's just an interesting example from the history of graffiti. But again, this idea of collective reflection. When the first round of people were drawing this, they all had that shared experience. So it became a symbol of something, a symbol of home. So I think also the idea of controlling public visual space is often about challenging perception. And so there's something called ad busting. This is something that happened more in the mid-2000s. I don't see it as much right now. But this is a Stella Artois billboard. All the red writing is done with spray paint after the fact. And so somebody's taken this ad and given it a new context by writing on top of it. And so I think that is a pretty subversive response to advertising. Again, one of the things that graffiti and street art as well can do is perform a function in public visual space that isn't trying to sell you something or tell you where to go. And so I think this opportunity to be critical of existing things and just have a very clear response is interesting too. So kind of wrapping up, what you can see on the left is an example of that sort of aesthetic of graffiti that I talked about, that subculture, that craft of how to paint with a spray can, how to develop and bend your letters in a certain way. One of the interesting things about this, some of you might be able to read the piece on the left here. It says steel, S-T-E-E-L. And one of the reasons that the letters are distorted and bent and made a little bit more obfuscated like that is actually because of graffiti artists getting arrested. In the mid and late 80s, there was a big crackdown in New York and a few other big metropolitan centers, and a lot of young graffiti artists were getting arrested. And so the style of graffiti started to change to respond to that. It became more wild and less legible, so that's called wild style. So when you see graffiti that's on the side of a train car, it's intentionally made hard to read. Different than this one where it says vibes, that's got very clear legible. But this one stylistically is a wild style piece. There is a function to that choice of style. So the function of graffiti has informed the form. And again, when you see things spray painted, like some of those examples on the right, the tool that you're using really informs the aesthetic of that final form. And I find spray paint has a sense of urgency that I don't necessarily get from brushstrokes. Last little story, sometimes it gets complicated. So anytime I talk about graffiti, people are like, hey, you know about Banksy, right? Sometimes people say Bansky, but Banksy is the name that is pronounced. So he's an artist from the UK, a pretty well-known stencil artist, probably one of the best-known graffiti artists in the world. And one of the things that's really interesting about his work is that he's had so much commercial success that his illegal or unsanctioned works are now being cut out of the wall in the middle of the night, and then people are taking them on the secondary market and selling them. And so for me, what it does is points at this really interesting relationship between commerce and art, where it's sort of like capitalism being like, sort of eating at itself a little bit. So I think there's something really fascinating there, that the people that are tearing it out of the wall aren't the building owners. So there are other people coming to commit a crime to remove his crime from the wall to make some money on the secondary market. So it starts to just point at this like, okay, well, these people know it's valuable, but also he'll get arrested for it, but if he does it somewhere else, he'll get paid a lot of money for it. So I think it just starts to point at some of the inconsistencies in the way that we treat public art or graffiti or any unsanctioned art. The idea behind this piece, if it wasn't immediately obvious, is there's a young boy on a sewing machine sewing a line of Union Jack flags. And so the idea is just sort of poking, it's a commentary on indentured children's work, slave labor, child labor, that kind of thing. So for it to be stolen is amazing. Okay, so here's a quick summary of some of the things that I was thinking about. Art art being able to inform or opine in public spaces, offering opportunity for escape both for the artist and the audience, and then tools for collective reflection. Cool. So that is it for me. I wanted to open it up for some discussions, some questions. I feel like this is a conversation that is still evolving, and yeah, I want to know if any of this is useful. Cool. Seeing a few nods. One, thinking about use. Here are a couple starter points that I was thinking about. Some of them I mentioned already. But just the idea of like, if we're all getting more segmented into these bubbles of thought based on our algorithm, which is not set necessarily by us, painting something in a public space that you share space with, I think dodges some of those issues. So you just sort of get around the algorithm issue, right? Like just the fact that you're geographically centered is important there. I think the low barrier to entry and accessibility is valuable too. So that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons I think it's useful and still useful. I do have a question about relationship to other collective action. So when I think about protest and when I think about policy making and all these other things, yeah, sometimes it's not the easiest thing to tie those together, you know? So that's one kind of open question I have is how to form some of those relationships with other collective actions. And then in terms of things I'm thinking I missed, and I'm hoping to add to this list, one of the things about graffiti is that any illegal act often carries more risk for more disadvantaged people, but those are often the people who feel the need to seize a voice. So there is a tension there that needs to be acknowledged. I think there are things that you can take from graffiti and street art without having to take legal risks, but still being able to understand how they subvert and capture attention or do things like that. So I think there's still some learning to do there, but I think that risk is worth acknowledging. And I'm also curious about which strategies can be transposed into new mediums. Again, like what can we take from graffiti that doesn't just have to be done with a spray can? How can we take some of these learnings and move them into maybe digital spaces or other art forms? Yeah.
The bits about the equity of accessibility of art through graffiti really stood out to me. And so I have my own ideas, but I'm curious from your perspective, how does that inform your creative process when you're going into a work that you know is going to be in a gallery like this, and the kinds of people that have the time and access to these kinds of galleries versus what you're doing out through other mediums, and what comes out and the ways in which you express that.
Yeah. No, I like that question a lot. To me, the question kind of ends up being about context. You know, like how do you respond to that context? And that's social political context too. I think about attention a lot and how in a gallery space, you're privileged to be in that space with the intent often of your attention just being on the art. When I'm painting in public, I know that I need to grab people in a different way. And if I am trying to give or share something with them, it probably has to be a little smaller or easier to digest. Or I need to break it up into little pieces and you can take one piece at a time. If I try and give you a whole platter at once and you go and buy on a bus, it's not gonna work. You know, you might not even get enough to get a bite and then it's maybe you won't engage with it. So that's one way I think about it. But I think I need to think about it more still. You know, like I think there's more digging to do there. I also do a lot of like workshops and I try and share skills with the spray can with a lot of people just because of that accessibility. So like once you know, I can teach you like 4 or 5 little tricks quick and like it'll ramp you up the learning curve quickly. It's a medium that kind of works like that. And so that's one thing I'm excited about. Just in kind of dovetailing with that point about equity and accessibility, the more people that have this skill, the more people can get that voice out. And I think we need more voices, not just a few louder ones, or I think like more is definitely part of it. So yeah, thank you, that's a valuable question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can articulate my questions clearly. Well, thank you for the presentation or your talk about graffiti. I feel like it's really educated me in, you know, like your understanding your definition of graffiti. A lot of the language you have used when you're speaking of your work, graffiti and mural, you use a lot of word community. how the environment and the community provide another context of your work. And it almost sounds like it's really important for you, for your work, to have this direct conversation with the viewer. Or, like, for example, when someone passes by add another text on your graffiti, that is another layer to your work in itself, right? So I'm looking at this gallery right now, like I really like your work, but I'm seeing this contradiction in how your work or how you approach your work, your graffiti work versus how you approach your studio work, knowing that there will be displays in a white cube. I'm just sort of curious, does it change how you produce work or creative process or decision making? And how do you reconcile this contradiction?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's really interesting. For me, when I'm painting murals, they're so tied to space, a particular place, that I feel like I can get a not static, but I can get a good understanding of that context that will maybe be true for a period of time in that place. And the lifespan of a mural is usually between 5 and 15 years unless it gets painted over or destroyed. So that's kind of the time scale I'm thinking on. With this work, since I know it's existing in these white cube galleries, the relationship to place is so different. I think that's a big part of it. And in terms of my process, connecting with community is such a big part of my process on public work. And partially it's because I feel like things in public spaces, we don't all own, but we kind of do. Like we all, especially public visual culture, like I think that's why I painted graffiti, because I kind of felt like I had the right. Maybe that's arrogant or misinformed or whatever, but I was like, I have to look at this wall every day and it looks dumb. Like it's boring and it's gray and I never see anything that looks like me or tells my story. I'm just gonna do it. And so I think that, that sense of urgency and there's, I think something there. It's funny because when I started out just as a graffiti artist, and I wasn't doing any community consultation, I was just painting whatever I wanted. And then I became more interested in public art and more interested in connecting with people, and so I did more community consultation and painted all these other projects, and I'm kind of, this work feels a little more, maybe insular or, just more from an internal place than trying to capture a bunch of voices at once and then hone it into one. I thought a lot when I was working on this body of work about the idea of singing in a chorus. And sometimes you sing in a chorus so long you actually forget what your own voice sounds like. And so this body of work represents an opportunity for me to just do this and hear myself again. And so that's part of it for sure. But I do feel like all of this learning from community does inform this work in some way. It's just connected a little differently. Yeah, thank you.
Do you ever go back and edit your work? Or is it a one, it's that, when you're done with stuff?
With these, I go back and carve them sometimes.
No, I meant your mural.
Mural work. To a certain point, and then often I'll put a coating on them that just seals it off, or else I would just always go back and I'd be like, oh, I missed a spot, and just be back forever. So for my own sanity and the sake of my time, I'd have to call it done. It never really feels done, and I'm pretty critical of my own work, so it's easy for me to look back and be like, but
I'm just curious as to what, just simple question is when you started doing graffiti, like what year, how old were you?
So I started doing graffiti, it's like in middle school, and I started doing graffiti because all my friends were breakdancing, and I wanted a cool breakdancing name, and I had to learn how to write it good. And so that was it. Like, okay, I have a name now. I'm like, I was so lanky too, like I had the wildest spider-looking six-step, it was ridiculous. But then I started practicing writing this tag, right, that represented my breakdancing name. And then I started getting good at that, and I cared more about that than breakdancing, because breakdancing wasn't going to work for me. So just kind of took that and took it forward. That was kind of the first thing. I had that with me for a bit. It was kind of dormant. So my friend had a mini ramp in his backyard. I lived basically in a pretty rural community, but his dad built in this wood mini ramp in his backyard. And so I remember one of our friends from the city, he's a little younger than us, but he lived in the city, so he saw graffiti all the time. And he's just a talented artist. And so he was really good with spray paint. And so I remember him basically doing a piece on the mini ramp in spray paint and kind of watching his technique, his process, and that was when I got more interested in painting. So I kind of had a marker tag for 4 or 5 years, and then really got into actually making graffiti and painting on the streets and that kind of thing. Yeah, well, 4 or 5 years after that. So by the time I was actually painting, I was in my late teens, and I think I was probably 14 when I started catching tags. So I think that's about right. Yeah. I'm not the best documentarian of my own history. So.
What was your first tag?
Spider.
So that was the breakdancing name?
Yeah, Spider.
Okay, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
Have you seen the movie Wild Style?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I assumed you would.
Yeah,
What
Main
I?
Street, yeah.
Do you remember the first time you saw it or how young you were?
I did not see that movie as a formative part of my graffiti experience at all. Like, I saw it when I was like 20.
I feel like most people don't,
Yeah.
but then it's interesting to see that and look back with personal perspective and experience in the work. But for some reason, not until this show did I tie Wild Style as when they make it illegible. Because, anyway, I've experienced that plenty of times. I can't read some writers' name and they're doing that on purpose, yeah.
Totally, yeah. And I find that form and function relationship, particularly in graffiti, is fascinating, right? Like, there's even color combos that you would use on a train if you're painting at night versus during the day. Like if you're painting at night and the inside of your letters is a really dark color, and then you have a mid-tone for your outline, it's too dark to tell the value difference between those two. So you need high contrast difference just between your outline and the inside of your letters, right? If you have an effect on the inside of the letters, it doesn't matter, because you don't really need to be able to see it that well, but the outline you actually need to be able to see the whole time you're painting. So like, there's so many little things like that that really inform the style of it that I find fascinating.
And then sometimes you don't get to finish in time, so then, did you ever have a, I don't know what you want to call it, but someone who was crossing your workout?
Oh yeah, beef, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I didn't know how to word it, but yeah. But like, did you have a long-standing one with someone in particular that would you cross out their work and did you know back and forth specifically?
Not super long, probably for like, yeah, probably for like 6 months or something. Yeah, like, and a couple different times with different people. And then Edmonton's such a small city, we like end up knowing each other and be like, oh, actually, I like you, bro. We're good.
That's the situation in this city.
Totally, man. Yeah, young men in particular, you know. Yeah.
When you switched from Spida, can you tell us what your tag changed?
Yeah, I went through a few different names. I wrote Asper after that for many years. I was in GSC crew for a long time with Fleur and Cruz, those guys from Toronto. And then I won't tell you what I write after that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
I really was just in love with these visuals. When I first walked into this gallery, I came with a friend and we were both like, holy shit, what the fuck?
Thank you so much.
Kind of lost our shit, especially as a kid who grew up crocheting and doing latch hook. I was just like, wait, what? Punch needle is very similar, and I just realized it's so beautiful to take, because here you talk about the care with which you do graffiti. I feel like I could see the strength and the contrast with the way you use yarn and tell the story through yarn, and it's really, really, really amazing. And also just straight up geeking about the time travel shit, like the invitation to step on the transporter with bare feet and stuff. Yeah, me and my friend were kind of losing our shit.
Oh man, that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I was here that day and I didn't talk to you because I felt like you guys were having your own
Yeah.
experience. And I didn't want to interrupt you, but I could tell you're having a great time.
Yeah, I literally went home and just like, ah!
I made this for y'all, so I'm so happy that
Yeah,
it worked. So
it's
thank you.
beautiful. And also too, as like a mini herbalist, the use of local plants, because as a Caribbean and South American heritage person, like I obviously love the coconuts and all this stuff that doesn't grow naturally in -40 and more winters and very short summers. But over time, I definitely grew a relationship with the plants and the botany here, because obviously the plants are here to help. And so it was just really beautiful to see that reflected in your work as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was my pleasure. I want to maybe just point to one thing that you brought up, this idea of...
I'll turn on the lights.
Yeah. comment about spray paint and how some of that technique maybe translates into this medium. One thing that I was really excited about learning was how to blend between two colors. So with the tufting gun, you normally thread 2 strands of yarn of the same color into the gun. But if you run 3 strands of color, 2 of the same color and 1 of a darker color in, then you can start to create these gradations between colors that can give you like a volumetric effect. So instead of feeling like really graphic and static, you can get this dimensional look. And that combined with the carving was something I was really excited about, to be able to make the figures feel like they're emerging from the frame. So that definitely came from this experience using spray paint. And I think about the way, only in the cut pile version. So in the background, the low relief section is loop pile. That's a different type of tufting gun. And then this section is cut pile. And one of the things that's fascinating to me about the cut pile is that when you think about it, you're looking at a bunch of the ends of grains of yarn. So when you're looking at the loop pile, you're looking at the side of a piece of yarn, right? But with the cut pile, you're looking at the end grain. And so basically it's like a pointillist way of creating an image. It's a bunch of points. And when you spray a spray can, it's the same thing. You're atomizing paint, and it's a bunch of specks of the same color of paint that basically assemble to create what looks like a mark, right? So in a way, they're doing the same thing. It's like each one of these is a pixel, and each splatter of paint from a spray can is the pixel in effect. So it's interesting. Once I started to think about it like that, it unlocked some new techniques that I was excited about, just based on some of that thinking that I was transposing from spray painting.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, how did you get into this type of thing compared to the murals? Like what's the story about
I
that?
blame a woman named Fern from Fern's School of Craft in Edmonton. So she's a craft teacher. She's primarily a weaver, but she's a textiles expert. And she started on her own accord, started this artist residency. So her being an artist as well, obviously, she wanted to invite artists from other disciplines into her studio to learn some of her craft. And so a friend of mine took the residency and then kind of recommended me. And it's not something I ever would have applied for, but Fern just reached out and was like, hey, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, I guess. It's totally out of my wheelhouse, not normally something I'd say yes to. And I think just the timing worked out, and I just fell instantly down into the rabbit hole, like all the way down quickly.
The universe knew you needed to go meet Fern.
Yeah. I believe that.
Yeah.
One of the interesting differences for me is the tactile relationship with the work. So with a spray can, it's much different than painting with a brush. With a brush, you actually have a relationship to the surface you're painting. You can feel the texture of it through the brush. With a spray can, you don't physically make any contact, so I don't actually sense the texture of the wall at all. And so I think there's this disconnect physically, like just in a tactile way from the wall. I only feel the spray can. It's a hard, cold can, and then there's a rigid plastic button on the top. And so the tactile experience of it is very just rigid, and it tends to be cold. It's not a very humanist experience. And then working with fiber is just the other end of the spectrum. So my relationship to the work is so different. Yeah.
You keep such a soft material also, which I find, was there any sort of, we all do things because we like them. Was there anything about, yarn specifically that drew you in, or was your brain just I love this, and that was the end?
I think that's what Fern showed me at first, and that's what I just tried, and then fell down the rabbit hole. And I've tried lots of other stuff now, and I'm like, no, the first one was good. I am excited about, we're doing some experiments in the studio coming up later this year, and we are excited about doing some recycling some textiles, so thrift store bed sheets, cutting them into strips and running those through the loop pile tufting gun. So we've done some studies and it works. So just figuring out a story to tell with that medium is kind of the next step. So I'm excited to play around a little bit more just with the materiality. I feel like I'm just cracking into the surface, so there's so much.
Silk versus
And brushed yarn versus unbrushed yarn, I found to be different, it's wow.
Welcome to craft, you'll be doing this for the rest of your life. Yeah. I do think that though, my background is textile, so I spend a lot of time thinking deeply. Your background is also textile, so we spend a lot of time thinking deeply about textiles in the way that you spend thinking deeply about graffiti. And I see a connection between when you're talking about the community and graffiti. I actually see a lot of those connections in textiles because it's often quote unquote women's work, or women are doing this as a craft that they're doing because they didn't have access to
other crafts or opportunities to be outside of their home, right? So you can't go work in the wood shop, you gotta watch the kids, and you need something you can pick up and set down a lot, and that maybe is contributing to your family, like it keeps your kids warm, or like there's this sort of like peopleness and also this sort of like I don't have room to make art, so this is where where I find space to do this and that is socially acceptable. That I found like I think there's like these two mediums I think are ripe for like it makes a lot of sense when you know more about textiles, how you got there, and it's like very interesting to me.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So I think there's more connections between these mediums conceptually. Like I think over time you'll I can't wait to see where you're at in 15 years in these two mediums because I think they're more connected than maybe like people realize perhaps.
Cool, yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
I applied for a grant to get some funding to do a painting and textiles combination piece. I have no idea if it'll come through, but now I want it to.
Yeah.
Cool.
I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't feel like there's much of a departure from graffiti than it might seem like, perhaps. Anyway.
Yeah, I can't wait to, I'm like this close to my work all the time as all of us are, so I can't wait to zoom out and get that sense of perspective. Like,
right, like if you ever get to, I think we all, that's why like critical writing is so important because we're also like, you can't, anyway.
No,
Give you back the floor.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that I howl when you accidentally cut into your piece in the video. As someone who's also accidentally carved into their piece in the video. So.
You know my thing.
It was great.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but it was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh yeah, lesson learned on that one. So back together well, so yeah. I have a studio assistant that helps me around the studio sometimes, and so she's just learning to do some of the carving too, and she just tore a big hole in her first piece, and I was like, welcome to the club! So, shouldn't have to feel bad about it, she saw me doing it on video. So.
Well, thank you so much, AJ. This was such a fantastic talk. And we're so lucky to have your work here and to have you give this amazing talk. So thank you so much for being here.